Hi, this is Paul. I've been thinking a lot about the image of God and the non-player character meme, and I may entitle this video um, the argument from non-player characters for the necessity of God or something like that. Now, the non-player character meme, gosh, memes come so fast. The culture is moving so fast. I heard about this a year ago or so, and I always feel myself late to the game. After our Friday morning sessions on Discord or my Sunday service, I'm in the AV room with Rick, and Rick's always showing me some new thing he found on the internet, and it just blows my mind. So every pastor needs a Rick. But the image of the non-player character meme basically comes from people playing video games, and I know that there's a degree of I don't know, embarrassment on some by that, but video games are I think one of the, let's say if motion pictures, movies, television were sort of the vital art form emergence of the 20th century, well, video games could be for the 21st century because it takes the movie art form and brings it to another level. Now, the non-player character meme, basically, if you play a video game, there are non-player characters. And now with massive multi-person video games, where like World of Warcraft, in the second conversation I had with Topher, he talked quite a bit about video games. That's a 2 hour plus conversation, so that's coming a little bit later this week. I've been putting out 2 a day lately. I know some of you. Is my sound on? Hang on. I got the open studio over there. Okay, back to video games. Well, in video games, when you're playing with, the only video game I really play much of is Civilization, and I'm on Civ 6 right now, and I'm not a particularly good player, and I play with my son Jared, who you can find on the Discord, and he usually beats me, but I still enjoy playing, and I can't play the first person shooters with a lot of people because Pong was just coming online when I was young, so there we have it. So I can't work those joysticks like y'all can. But anyway, so there's all these non-player characters, and they're computer generated characters, and they work from AI, and they're dumb. Okay, maybe they've been getting smarter, but they're dumb, or they're cheats, and we have a sense of that, and we have a sense when we're playing against a real person. Now increasingly, and this gets tied into the meaning crisis. Well, what on earth does that mean? And I've been thinking about, basically, theologically, it'd be anthropology, about what is a human being and what are we? And we are really repeaters. And so what propaganda is, basically, if you're working your we're all getting a lesson in civics during this last election. What word am I thinking of? If the legitimacy of your government is based on a popular vote, okay, that's a certain system, and that stands in contrast and comes in some ways in opposition to divine right, which was monarchies, and you can read about that in the early modern period, where kings ruled by divine right. And of course the Enlightenment comes around and says, no, it's the consent of the governed. And so consent at a very deep level becomes something vital. Now, I did a conversation with Byrne that I just released, my friend Byrne Power, and if you haven't watched that conversation, and if you don't, as someone noted, his channel is ridiculously undersubbed. Byrne is this source of just a voluminous information about culture in the late 20th century. I mean, he's a music nerd and an art nerd and a puppetry nerd, of all things, puppetry. And so he's also big into Jacques Ellul and propaganda, and so basically propaganda is a way to colonize the masses, and it assumes that to one degree or another the masses are a non-player character. And of course, if you've been following along, we've been trying to get a sense of what we mean by this word spirit or spiritual, and so the non-player the non-player characters are sort of the fodder of spirit. It's what gets propagandized. It's that which can be easily colonized. And this, of course, becomes a meme because when we see someone who has been colonized or pwned or owned by some political agenda or some ideology, or they always come up with the same answers. And this has been a complaint against Christians. Well, they've been indoctrinated. That word has become a negative thing. And all of this conversation behind this just reveals an anxiety about freedom. And an anxiety, and of course, the key word today is authenticity. And of course, Charles Taylor writes about this. And we all want to be authentic, that we want to somehow be connected to some real thing. And this leads to the secret sacred self, which is imagined to be down within us. That the true me is, I joke sometimes, the true me is Shirley Temple. I'm not a bald 57-year-old Dutch Calvinist. I'm a 6-year-old in a cute little skirt, tap dancing on an airplane, singing the Good Ship Lollipop. It is an airplane. It's not a boat. And that's who I am on the inside. That's my true self. That's my real self. And of course, this gets poured into all sorts of things like gender identity and sexuality, and these are the things kind of running under our politics and our zeitgeist right now. And so people who are maybe a little bit smarter or a little bit more aware of the latest internet meme or a little bit better briefed on the zeitgeist, it's one easy way to dismiss people is that they're non-player characters. They've just been programmed by the ideology or the culture. They've been programmed by something and they're just running through their program. They're unoriginal. They're boring. We don't like them. We're looking for fresh ideas, new things. In the attention economy of YouTube, we're looking for something which will capture our interest, something which will dazzle us. I think about some of the songs in Moulin Rouge, a movie that I very much enjoy. I really like Moulin Rouge a lot. I should probably listen to its soundtrack again. I find that movie quite compelling, but maybe I'm an NPC for that. And so there's hierarchy that developed. Who is the freshest? And Kanye West and some of the other, as Jonathan Peugeot calls them, clowns, that part of the reason they grab our attention is because, who can make up Alex Jones? And when Alex Jones starts sounding sane, either we're in trouble or he's lost his edge. And so we're looking for that. And so to be a non-player character is to be dismissed, is to be someone who is unimportant. It's to be someone who sort of recedes into the background. These are the fodder that we shoot up easily in our first person shooters. Either that or they're the cheats because they've been programmed by the computer. And so when I play Civilization, as you go up into the difficulty levels, because I'm smarter than the computer just cheats. It gives itself more cities. It gives itself more resources. All these ways to try to compete with me. And I'm using my relevance realization to try to outcompete the computer. But when I play a computer game against a real person, well, now I've got a challenge because someone else has been colonizing and reading the background and figuring out and directing it. And again, I find it hard to imagine that we're really going to get beyond telos, because beyond goals, and because when I'm playing Civilization with my son Jared, he loves to beat me. And now we kind of know each other, and so if I have an island map and if I'm on a different continent, I usually invest more in Navy and Air Force, and so he can't get to me, but he invests in leveling up his land troops. And so if I'm in a landmass with him, I know I'm in trouble because he tends to emphasize the land warfare and I tend to emphasize the Air Force and the Navy. And so he can't get to me, and that really frustrates him. And so then he learns the certain wonders that I get to ramp up my Navy, and he tries to get those wonders before me, and back and forth Jared and I go, trying to play Civilization, trying to beat each other. And of course, it's great fun because here's the thing. As a son, it's always fun to beat your father, but not too much because he's your father. And as a father, it's not as much fun to beat your son, but you want to put up a good fight. And there's always something proud in you when your son beats you, because you have a sense of I've brought you into the world and I want you to be better than I can be. So that's sort of how progress and progression moves into that. So the non-player meme is around there. I better read my slide, otherwise I'll forget it. Down for the repeater of popular ideas, someone who is lacking agency, someone who is a dupe or a shill for a bigger name or a larger spirit. Now, I've also been talking a lot about our first draft nature, how when you first get married, let's say, or you first begin a significant relationship with someone, let's say you're living together or something like that, you bump into all of these ways that you are simply formed by your parents. You have all of these built-in behaviors and notions and expectations that you don't realize you have. They just are a product of your upbringing. And so in that sense, there's the first draft that you have within you is also sort of a non-player character. It's not thinking, it's not conscious, it's not intentional. It just, the world is such. You have a map of the world and you're working from it. And then if you start living, especially if you're living with someone of the opposite sex and you have an intimate relationship with them, and there's a very interesting conversation with Guy Sengstock and Christopher Mastropietro and John Vervaeke and Jordan Green, or Jordan Hall, it used to be Green Hall, no Hall, Jordan Hall on the self, which is a really wonderful conversation, and probably one I should listen to again, because they really went into some very interesting places with respect to the self. But anyway, so we're all these non-player characters inside, and we sort of sense that, and this is where we're sort of multiple inside, and we have our consciousness congress, and we're trying to improve ourselves. And so we have this sense that to the degree that I can, this is part of the reason you go into therapy, to the degree that I can sort of transcend the non-player character that is within me, the degree that I have some agency, that I have some insight, that I have some realization about how I've been formed and how I'm put together and what it is to be me, so that now in the context of this intimate relationship or this marriage or this business or this church or this community, I can sort of level up and I can have more agency and I can act with more consciousness and I can do all of these things. So we're absorbers. We are the most capable compression algorithm imaginable. That was kind of I do videos, and usually part of the reason I do videos is sometimes in the process of the video, I will say something. And I use the video to harvest what I say, and I use my audience to find out if I've said something of some substance, because if I do, sometimes it's just funny, sometimes it's creative, but it gets echoed back to me. Just this morning when I logged into the open studio on the Discord server, I mentioned that I was reading Church Fathers, and someone said A team or B team, because I'd made the comment about Maximus the Confessor as a B-team church father, and part of the joy of and really the usefulness of the Discord server for me has been a community where they can't keep up with my videos. I've been doing 2 a day lately. My sister just is getting healthy from surgery, and if you think I can put out content, you should see my sister. She just puts out content about different things. But, we come from the same line, and that creativity that I can sort of find back in my ancestors, my grandmother and my grandfather and the Vanderklay side. And I'm going to mention the song from Sarah Groves, "You Are the Sun." I can't listen to that song and not tear up. And then I'm sort of like my grandfather on my mother's side, my mother's father, because by the end of his life, he couldn't get through family devotions without tearing up, and he would make these cassette videos for his he would make cassette videos, and he'd play music on them, and he'd read scripture on them, and he'd have to stop the video because he was crying. Well, why is he crying? Well, it's because it's moving him deeply. Well, why is it moving him deeply? Well, stuff had been imprinted from him early on, and so you get the sense of a life as a sacrifice, as a as something we give back to God, because it's all of this stuff that has been poured in. But we are repeaters, but we are these strange kinds of repeaters that are also agents. And so we get to decide what our eyes see and what our ears see and what we're reading and what we're putting into us, because what we put into us is what will come out of us, but of course reshaped and reformed, so that the relationship I have with my wife is different from the relationship my father had with my mother. And it is different from, and that's different from the relationship that my grandparents had with each other, and on and on and on. And so we are repeaters, but we're special kinds of repeaters. Now, the Sarah Grove song, she takes this ancient Christian image of God being the sun and we are the moon, because we understand that the moon has no light of its own. The moon does not shine like the sun. The sun shines, the moon reflects. And this song by Sarah Groves is just beautiful. And to me it touches me deeply, and that's why I say I can't well, we'll see how much I tear up just looking at the words of it. You are the sun shining down on everyone, light of the world, giving light to everything I see. Sort of the C.S. Lewis, I see by the sun, I don't just see the sun. It's the light of the sun that helps me see everything else. Beauty so brilliant I can hardly take it in. I can't look at the sun. And everywhere you are is warmth and light. And I am the moon with no light of my own. Still you have made me to shine. And so the first draft that I received from my parents and my grandparents and my Dutch Calvinist tradition and the genetics in my blood and the genetics in my body, and all of this comes together. Like, that's why I say we're the most amazing compression algorithm ever imaginable, because not only do we take all this stuff and not only are repeaters, well, what does God call? You are the image of God. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that if you think of God number one, so let's focus on God number one now, the arena, the God who is immanent, the God of whom the whole earth declares your glory. We are the image of that God. Now we're going to get into God number two and how we're image of that God too, because the image of God number one is that we are first drafts. We are repeaters. We are non-player characters, and we absorb and we absorb. And this picture here, that little toddler, that's my youngest son, Ben. And, it's amazing, because if you have enough kids, well, they don't really repeat. But so my wife was adopted and eventually reunited with her birth mother, and she has a full-blooded brother and sister. And that whole process was interesting, because she was raised by people very different from the family that gave her up. Her birth mother and her birth father eventually married. Her birth mother became pregnant as a teenager at 15, and but kept a relationship with her birth father. And then when they got a little older, they married and had 2 more children, and they themselves divorced. But the birth mother was quite a bit more interested in reuniting with my wife. But the birth father was not as interested, but she got to meet him, and then when he passed a number of years ago, we got to see pictures of him in his youth, and if he doesn't look a lot like my oldest son and my youngest son. Now, Jared, my second son, who you'll find in the community sometimes, he looks a lot more like me. Jared's my height, and he looks sort of like me and like my father. And sometimes I look at pictures of my son Jared and pictures of my father when he was young, and same color hair, same body build, and it's just interesting how these genetics come through. And so we're these copies, but we're also these absorbers of patterns of my children all have the rough draft of my marriage to my wife, for better or for worse. They have the rough draft of me as a father, for better or for worse. For me as a man, for better or for worse. And all of that is in them, and they won't discover that until they get into a certain situation and they find this rough draft manifesting themselves. And part of the reason we can't really define this nature-nurture line is because it's all of a thing. It's all coming together. And so I am the moon. I am all of these rough drafts, and just waiting for the light of the sun to shine on me with no light of my own. Still you make me to shine. In other words, now we're getting into God number 2. The agent in the arena, the conscious actor, the chooser, the one that says, well, here's the rough draft of my parents' relationships. This is how I am going to try to improve it. And maybe, you try something out and you hope it's an improvement, so you try it out and you really realize it's not an improvement. It was a step back, and so you try something different. And of course, but my wife is not my mother, and I am not my father. And so to put us together, and then, of course, we're going to have children, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And as I glow in this cold, dark night, I know I can't be a light unless I turn my face to you. You are the sun shining down on everyone, light of the world, giving light to everything I see. Beauty so brilliant I can hardly take it in, and everywhere you are is warmth and light. Shine on me with your light. Without you, I'm a cold, dark stone. Shine on me, I have no light of my own. You are the sun, and I am the moon. And the song is, me reading the lyrics is nothing like the music itself, and it is. It's and the title of her album, which I didn't notice until just right now, Add to the Beauty, and that's what we do. So we take these first drafts, and then, which are sort of God number 1 within us, and then the God number 2 given to us. This conscious agent, we take this first draft and we try to improve it. And so we try to grow beyond being non-player characters. And again, this is built into the meme, built into the conversation, that somehow we want to transcend from being non-player characters. This is built into the Matrix movie, of course, because Agent Smith, what do the agents do? You see them, there's somebody just driving a garbage truck, right? And then the agent comes into it, and now we know the agent's coming into it in the movie because they morph into one of the agents, and now we can recognize them. Before, they were actually more unique, but they were a non-player character. They were just a police officer, or just a garbage man, or just something else, but now they're an agent. And in many ways, we want to go from being these non-player characters into agents. We want agency. We want to become a real boy in Pinocchio. So I've been reading church fathers, and I decided, well, I'm going to start at the beginning. So I started with Clement of Alexandria, or Clement of Rome, very early church father. Something that I've dabbled into before, because if you're doing any work in New Testament epistles in Greek, sometimes, you found a haplax legomena, which is a word that's only found once in the New Testament. So you want to find some other examples of it to see what the word means, again, and what you're doing with sort of this historical grammatical exegesis. You're trying to mind read the Apostle Paul. And of course, that's a really fraught thing, but you're trying to get back into it. So I have copies of quite a bit of material from church fathers in my Logos Bible software, but I don't have all of it in Greek. And so I'm reading along in letter to Diognetus. I'm going to have to figure out how to say that. And they're talking about the Jews. And of course, I've been talking to some people about anti-Semitism lately, and not on the channel, but offline. And as anti-Semitism has always sort of mystified me. I mean, what's with the annoyance and, in fact, the hatred of the Jews? What's with that? I think part of it is because, remember in my last video I talked about, you can sort of think of civilization as this huge genocidal story. Now, again, that's a disparaging way of putting it, but there's a devouring aspect to imperialism and to civilization that once you get connected into the net, let's imagine you're well, this is what happened with the Columbian, when Columbus basically, globalization, 1493, Charles Mann's excellent book, globalization, the Columbian Exchange, globalization begins when Columbus basically ties the Americas into the network. Now, I'm a huge fan of Oak Island, which is the biggest tease on TV. Are they ever going to find anything? Is there anything under there? But the Curse of Oak Island. And so you see that, Europeans had come to the Americas for a while, and we know that about the Vikings and some of these things. But what happens in the Columbian Exchange is that the network, whose sort of its epicenter is in Europe at that point, begins to reach out and connect the world. And so you have silver from South America flowing into China, and China is at that point very much the superpower. And the reason the Europeans wanted to get to China is because China has all the best technology and all the best commercial goods. And if you can get stuff from China, it's so much better made than Europe. And again, I can't think about this value now. And Sevilla has sufficiently colonized me, a quality experience that I've got Persig in my mind. And again, this is what happens to us. Ideas have power and they colonize us. And how do we know when an idea is better or worse than another? We don't really know, but we have a sense about it, an intuitive sense about it, and so sort of captures our interest. And again, you think about McGilchrist and the master and the emissary. The master is the intuitive mind, and the emissary is the accountant that gets all the reason right and gets it all out there. But the master is calling the shots. So how did I get onto Persig and value? Well, imperialism, civilization is one grand avaricious eater of micro civilizations that have not developed and can't compete with the dominant one. And so there's sort of an implicit, certainly not a infallible meritocracy that happens in civilizations where they just consume one another. And this has been happening for a long time. And now there's just these little pockets of maybe aboriginal dwellers in deep rainforests. And we're revisiting Star Trek episodes when, well, should we allow ourselves to be known? We don't want to be paternalistic. Well, withholding yourself and your culture from someone who doesn't know it because you have some ideas about, protecting them, there's a deep paternalism built into that thing too. So how on earth did I get here from the church fathers? Anyway, anti-Semitism. I got to kind of retrace my steps. Okay, back to anti-Semitism. And so I'm reading in this church father. Now, why the hatred of the Jews? Well, in some ways, this peculiar people, and you can find this pattern in the Bible. This peculiar people was resistant to empire. It was resistant to the dominant culture. And in fact, the Gospels and the stories of Jesus are right there at the epicenter of that, because that's what they're dealing with. To what degree will we allow Athens to colonize Jerusalem? That's, in a sense, the culture war at the heart of the conflict between Herod and the Pharisees, let's say. And Jesus comes right into the middle of that conflict and steps in such a fresh way that both the dominant civilization of the Romans and the resistant civilization of the Jews comes into conflict. And I mean, this might sound a little Hegelian. Jesus sort of transcends that conflict. But what's so peculiar about history is that, and frankly, I think this is the providence of God. The Apostle Paul has colonized me sufficiently. Why do the Jews keep hanging around, somehow non-converted, yet always sort of in the midst of this culture? You couldn't make an argument that, the grand Jewish conspiracy, if they didn't win so many Nobel Prizes and weren't so influential in Hollywood or New York City. And what's with the capacity of the Jews to be able to do this? And even just saying the Jews makes it a question of, what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about them genetically? Because again, they're sort of an ancient holdout in that they're both a people whose religion and their ethnicity go together. Now, I was listening to Shane Allen and Jacob from the Discord server had a little conversation that was linked on the Discord server, and I was listening to that quite a bit last night. And I want to do another conversation with Jacob about this because, we've had in these later days. At the end of World War II, Islam seemed to almost disappear. And of course, no one would look at that and say, well, they disappeared today. They came roaring back, in the 20th century. There's sort of a renaissance of ultra-Orthodox Judaism. What's with that? What's with the strange death of Europe, Douglas Murray's title of the Islamic growth in Europe? What's going on with us? Anyway, so there's a lot going on here that is right before our very eyes that we can't see and don't know and want to gain perspective on, but it's very hard. So I've been reading church fathers, and because, over the last couple of years, I've been doing more reading of Tom Holland and reading of history. And Tom Holland basically prompted me to read more history and try to get better versed on, I guess, lots of history. And so you read enough secondary sources, and at some point you want to read primary sources, and you've got enough orientation to sort of get a sense of what on earth is going on in that ancient world. And so I'm reading the Epistle to Diognetus. The more I try to say it, the more I'll probably reinforce an incorrect pronunciation of it. And so I'm reading along in English, and I'm in the chapter 4. Of course, these chapters are really tiny in these books. You learn that if you read enough of them. But as to their scrupulosity concerning meats and their superstition as respect to the Sabbath. So here are the Jews. They're sort of this resistance. They're not on the fringe like aboriginals in the jungle. They're right there in the middle of it. It's basically in the middle of the world, at the nexus between Europe and Asia and Africa. And there are these people that somehow don't assimilate. And so something deep inside of us, the agents within the matrix, want to come and attack them. Why? Because they're not assimilating. We need them to assimilate to the non-player character, the dominant culture. And, the Borg, resistance is futile. Well, the Jews seem to say it isn't. But of course, all of their stuff is interesting. And now, to where I got from here, there's a real conflict between the Christians and the Jews in the first few centuries. Now conflict between, and if you keep reading this epistle to Diognetus, you'll notice it's conflicts between the Greeks and the Christians, because the Christians sort of take on this Jewish quality of being apart. And sort of when they reach preeminence in Europe, well, then they kind of, in my opinion, defy their Savior by becoming tyrants, because Jesus was many things, but he was not a tyrant. And so you see Jesus, but here's the thing. Jesus is not only a Jew, he's in a sense the quintessential Jew. Why is that? He's so much so that the first draft of him, which let's call the Old Testament, many of those on that draft turn against him. And the Christians will sort of perform this trick again and again and again. And so they're in conflict with the Jews. They're in conflict with the Greeks. Well, who does he mean by the Greeks? The Greeks is just the broader Hellenistic culture. But then I bump into this word, but as to their scrupulosity concerning meats and their superstition as respect to Sabbath. Now, wait a minute, a whole bunch of, part of things about reading church fathers in translation is, this gets into a lot of the reading about the Reformations and the Renaissance and classics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of these, you can find these translations out on the internet. Gosh, I feel like I'm rehearsing the Renaissance in my body. Okay, maybe that's what we've been doing for the last 3 years. So I'm reading through this in English, and I know full well many of these public domain translations of the church fathers are from the late 19th, early 20th century. And so their translations betray the culture of that point. So again, I've been trained in the grammatical historical interpretation, which has its roots back into the Renaissance periods and Erasmus and Luther and this whole story that I've been trying to tell. And so I read that word superstition, and of course that has a despairing valence. And so now, because of my sensitivity to anti-Semitism, okay, well, and I don't think it's I don't think it unfairly reads the mind of this Hellenistic Christian, this church father, who is in real life in conflict with real Jews, probably. But, so then, well, what's the Greek word under it? Desidemonia. And my Bible software says, the English translation of that is religion. Oh, now I'm deep into Tom Holland land. What is superstition? What is religion? Why would the dietary laws and the Sabbaths and the circumcision and the fasting and the new moons be pejoratively labeled as superstition by a 2nd century Christian? Okay, because the conflict is hot back there. And then why would it be related to this word that we would have for demons? What do you see? Where's demons in that religious word? Well, diamonds, not diamonds, diamonds. Or daemon, let's say, because what we do in English now, because when we say demon, we're so deep into Christendom that when we think demon, well, if you go to a Pentecostal church, they'll tell you exactly what a demon is. You say, okay, but is that what they thought in the ancient world? Because they were seriously concerned about demons. But what did they mean by demons? And so now Barfield is ringing in my head, and C.S. Lewis, and I really want to do a video on how you really can't just simply go back through the thread, and when we read demon, this word in a 2nd or 3rd century text, it simply means what you'll find in a Pentecostal church or in Martin Luther. Well, what is it? Well, it's a spirit. And so, the Socrates is the daemon, the demon is talking to him and he listens to his demon. Well, we're not thinking about demon in that sense. What are we thinking about? We're thinking about a spirit. Well, what is a spirit? Well, school spirit. Someone recently was talking about their, the high school or college they went to. I said, school spirit, because it formed you. But what is school spirit? And so, what is a demon? A demon is almost in some ways analogous to nature. Why were demons found in nature? Why were, for example, the Navajo so worried about demons? Well, these are natural processes. They have outcomes, but they're also agentic. All right. So how does that connect up with religion and superstitions? Well, what are you doing with respect to your Sabbaths and your circumcision and your dietary laws and your practices? That's our new word now, our practices. And of course, if you say practices, that's so I'm not religious. I have practices. And of course, that's where Vervaeke is so good and so honest, because he's kind of, no, the old word is religion and the new word is practices. And what are we doing? Why are we using new words? Why are we trying to evolve beyond non-player character status to become a real boy or a real girl? And, why do we have to save our father from the belly of the whale? And, we're in the midst of all of us in this stuff. There's spirits behind the non-player characters. It's their coding. It's the ideology. And that's what we don't. Well, you're just, someone comes along and calls you a racist. And it's like, okay, you're an NPC, because everything's a racist now. Everybody's a racist and everybody's a sexist. And so now you're just trotting out D'Angelo or Kendi. See how fast the culture is going? There's just a few years old. And now already that's so 2018. You haven't had 2020 yet. Well, what is 2020? 2020 is Trump and the election. And look at my conversation with Byrne when he goes through this whole list of things that would have been huge news, but have completely overwhelmed by what we've been through. Now, this is the non-player characters. The NPCs are, of course, in contrast to the RGPs, the real game players. Well, what are those? They're real. They're human beings. They can do relevance realization. If the NPCs are reflections of God number one, or at least analogous to that side of the ledger, then the RGPs, they're God number two. They're the ones who are watching me, watching you, and they can mind read, and they have a sense of who you are, and they can anticipate what you're going to do, and they're conscious, so they can bring in all this information, and they can use reason, and they have all of these gifts, and they have intuitions, and when Jared plays, I know what Dad's going to do next, and because, I'll plant a city right by his kingdom or over on his continent, and Jared will get all prinkly, and I know what he's going to do next. He's going to try and get me off his continent, and, it's spy versus spy. It's back and forth, and the NPCs, once you basically own or pwn the NPCs, you can get them every time because they always do the same thing. They always say the same thing. They have no relevance. They have there's no creativity. There's no genuine article. There's no that thing at the bottom of the random number generator that makes sure that it's a real good random number and not just one that some hacker can easily duplicate or suss out. I mean, it's why, again, random number generators are so difficult, and so they need something that's sort of alive, sort of separate, so that they can have a better random number than the other random number. And you say, well, if it's random, but random. We're trying to get at the genuine article. We're trying to get at authenticity. We're trying to get at the source. We're trying to get at the thing itself, because we have a sense that the deeper we go down, the less non-player character. We're trying to get at the spirit at the center of the universe. We're trying to get at what has programmed the demons or the diamonds or the spirits. I say this wrong all the time. I might as well just use it. We're barking at the door of the meaning crisis. This should be knocking at the door or barking at. I put them together. We're barking at the door. It makes no sense at all, but it's mine now. It's my little agentic offering to the world. We're barking at the door of the meaning crisis, because the meaning crisis basically says, what if I'm a non-player character? What if I'm just simply the product of all the God number oneness that's been built into the world? What if there's no God number two in me at all? Because what happens is now with the internet, used to be that if you're in a village of a couple hundred people and you're smart, you're probably the smartest person in the village, and maybe you play the piano good. Well, you're the best pianist in the village. Now via the internet, we're in one global village, and there's always someone who's smarter, someone who's better read, and it doesn't even have to be maybe better read in general, but you're talking about this one thing, and someone out there knows this one thing. And that's what it's like to be a YouTube creator, because you make your little video, and like me, it's a mess. It's sloppy. It's half thought out. I misspeak. The sound is never quite good. And the picture is, the whole thing's a mess. And then you read the comments and you're just, exposed to be what a mess you are and the things you got wrong. And someone out there has read Barfield better than you have, or Lewis better than you have, or Socrates or Plato better than you have, or knows Vervaeke, or you're talking to someone who is a scholar and they spend all their time in books. But the thing is, I've got books and I've got people, but people, they're experts in people, and they're experts in books, and they're experts in all the different disciplines. And one human being can't compete with that. And so our algorithm is trying to compress all of this stuff and exist and exhibit some creativity, some God number two-ness, something of the genuine article out into the world, so that we can shine too, and not just be a cold, dark rock in space. A non-player character. Notice they're gray. We want to be a real game person, a real game player. So before I was reading Diognetus, I was reading Clement of Rome, and I've read him before in his letter to the Corinthians. And again, there's one copy of it that was attached to a book, and that's all we have. And I've read it before, but now, of course, I've been digging deeper into history. And so suddenly, when I'm reading Clement now, as opposed to the half dozen times I've read him before, suddenly it's fresher, because that image I have in my mind of that time and that space, and however low resolution and untrue it might be, I just have a little bit more information. Now, he was a very early Christian leader, likely knew Paul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, personally, and he writes a letter to the church in Corinth, and I'm reading through it, and it's sort of, if you read church fathers, and again, I've got all these commentaries, and if you read church fathers, sometimes, well, anytime we read a text, again, we're a pattern looking at a pattern. We're a reader reading a text. And as you're reading isn't just absorbing. It's because we've got now all these developed filters. And we filter these things in. And so there's a valence. Do we like them or do we don't like them? There's a tribal valence. Are they in our tribe or are they not in our tribe? And so we're reading through all of these things. And so much of this ancient stuff can seem so moralistic. And now there's lots of other filters that have been developed in me, huh? And it's sort of, we sort of see it as karma. And so we imagine this big, it's so funny because if you say it as karma, people are like, oh, tell me more. If you say it as legalism, churches and their laws and their dogmas. But karma, oh, tell me more. Karma isn't much different from legalism. Do right, get blessed. Do wrong, be cursed, right? And there's a layer of truth in that. Eat like crap, have terrible health. Eat well, have better health. Yeah, but you might get hit by a car. Well, that's just it. I mean, the world is too complex. And so you can read these texts and, okay. But now, digging into these demons, these little subroutines, these little programs, these little patterns, these little non-player characters, and you begin to, suddenly the church fathers start coming alive because, well, what are they talking about? Because, well, again, you've got the peculiarity. You read the Gospels, that very clearly situated in Judea, in that colonization-resistant group of people called the Jews, and Jesus, who can't seem to be colonized either by his Jewish, the Jewish people who want to sort of bring back the Old Testament, and the other Jews who are the Roman sympathizers who say, no, the better way is Rome. So you have your early adopters and your liberals and your conservatives, on and on and on and on. Obey God and be rewarded. Well, yes and yes. Disobey God and be punished. Yes and yes. God number one and God number two. But in a sense, they're also looking at the Romans. And they're also maintaining their own tradition. And so these Christians have Jewishness in them, and Jerusalem and Athens are coming together and being synthesized, and a new thing is coming out of them. There's a critique of basically common dissolution. Well, what dissolution? What do you mean by that? Common vice. I'm hungry. Food is a drive. It's a little demon inside of me that says, feed me. I have a sex drive. Ooh, that colonizes me. I have a drive for status. Ooh, that colonizes me. All of these drives in me, and epithumias, the Apostle Paul talks about them. They get manifest in different ways and talked about in different ways. And now again, this gets back into C.S. Lewis's Miracles, his great chapter of horrid red things, where you think, well, Paul's just disenchanting the world, and he's reducing the drives and desires in him to biochemical. It's like, yeah, but the biochemical is itself a reflection of something. Oh, now we're knocking at the materialist, non-materialist, spiritist, because it's matter and spirit, right? And you begin to recognize that, well, these desires in me are not disconnected to things. Oh, they're connected to my biology, but they're also connected to the culture net, to this immaterial relational pattern that is actually the thing that creates stuff. Where's my cell phone stand? You don't have a cell phone stand until you have cell phones. And you take all of this metal from the ground, gets colonized and made into this stand. And so which is spirit or matter? Oh, that hurts. Well, but my hand, moved by spirit, I've been, looking into Descartes too recently. And so, well, how does this stuff work? Lives driven, chasing the highs of sex, of drunkenness, the joys of poning. When was Nero gay when he would rape a Roman senator in the street? Or was it poning? Is sex the primary drive, O Sigmund? Or can sex be used as other drives? No. Rape is not about sex. Rape is about violence. No, it's about a lot of stuff. And it all sort of comes together in us, our non-player characterness that are running around and we're looking for status by using certain words, and we're looking for sex by doing certain things, and we're looking for escape. And now I can't wait to play the second conversation I had with Topher the Salty. Like I said, that's a 2-hour one, but we get into some of these things. Now, many philosophers are working on this because, in a sense, okay, they're chasing after status, they're chasing after sex, they're trying to dull the overall complexity of the world by living on booze, or you can use philosophy this way, or opium, or whatever. It's all of these demons, and we use that language metaphorically too. To the drunk in the street, they can't escape their demons, or the overbearing mother who expresses her insecurity by being controlling, or by being anxious, and so they're their demons, we say, and now we've sort of demythologized it and sort of domesticated it by well that's. Alcohol is his demon. Well, we're saying more than we know we're saying, because in the ancient world they'd say, yeah, it is his demon. But what makes you so sure it's not disconnected? Well, yeah. Well, alcohol is a common demon. Well, why? Well, because of biochemical, yeah. But what makes you so sure that there's not an immaterial manifestation of that going on? Well, again, now if you think about Cartesian substances, well, it doesn't really help you. But if you're not thinking in terms of Cartesian substances as your primary frame, and so now the Pentecostals trying to exercise the spirit of drunkenness don't seem quite so crazy, do they? But they couldn't have done all the philosophy, or maybe wouldn't do. They could do, of course. Were they or weren't they doing all this philosophy? Don't forget, James K.A. Smith was a Pentecostal before he became Christian Reformed. They're not dumb. What's going on? We don't know. We just gain status in certain parts of the culture by decrying enchantment. Well, we're enchanted by disenchantment. We don't escape this stuff. And so many philosophers were working on this. You look at the Stoics and you look at, what are they trying to do? They're trying to get a handle on their non-player character essence, and they're trying to get at something real, something foundational, something that will be ever fresh. It will be a spring of living water, John 4. It'll be a spring of living water, welling up into eternal life. And the woman at the well, who certainly has man problems, why don't you take me back to introduce me to your hubby? Well, I don't have a husband. Yeah, that's right, because you've had a few, and the one you're with isn't your husband now. Well, what's going on? I want that spring of living water and now this is when you listen to Jonathan Peugeot talk to rationality rules. Peugeot is right. It scales. When she says, I want your spring of living water so I don't have to keep coming back to the well. Jesus doesn't say, oh, you're dim, you're not a philosopher. Jesus understands that going to the well works on lots of different levels, which is why Peugeot's whole channel works, because it does work at lots of different levels. And when we begin to see it, we begin to oh, well, what's going on in the world? And we have a sense then of reciprocal narrowing and reciprocal broadening. And when we begin to read Jesus, we begin to say, well, this guy's really broad. This guy's really powerful. And when he speaks, nature listens. Oh, but now I just crossed another line, didn't I? What does it mean to be saved? It means all of this and more. It means to no longer be a non-player character. It means to be in touch with the source, the fount of all creativity and life and freshness that doesn't get old. Because if you live long enough, I tell the story about one homeless guy who sat in this office and put a can of beer right on this table and says, my life's in that can. Being drunk gets old, but I can't live without being drunk. Another homeless guy, I can't wake up sober. Think about that. Think about how steady the drip needs to be. And now beer is good because too much alcohol and becomes self-destructive. You got to find just the right level, or, maybe for some of us, caffeine. Just keep us right there at this edge because I dare not wake up sober. It's sobriety that we want. It's to be plugged into the living source that is always fresh and always new, and not an NPC at all. It's the heart of the real. That's what it means to be saved. Now, there are two directions in this. Of course, C.S. Lewis, writing a story about an uncle demon schooling a nephew demon in how to get a man. To us, a human is primarily food. Our aim is the absorption of its will into ours, to make all of the people in our life into non-player characters among us. The increase of our own area of selfhood at its expense, to make them all into non-player characters. I want a Stepford wife. I mean, this is just, I Mud, the old Star Trek episode. This is just littered throughout our culture. And when people come to me as a pastor and they're frustrated and they're complaining about their spouse or their parent or their child or someone, it's because I can't turn them into a non-player character. Or do you really want to? Well, part of me wants to. Yeah, I understand that. But once I do, they will now be boring to me and I'm going to go out and look for another. Oh, won't you? We call that adultery. To us, the demons, the things that run on themselves, the non-player characters beneath the world, a human is primarily food. Our aim is the absorption of its will into ours, the increase of our own area of selfhood at its expense, but the obedience which the enemy demands of men, that's God, this is C.S. Lewis writing. It's reversed, of course. The enemy demands of men is quite a different thing. One must face the fact that all the talk about his love, well, what is love? Love is, I don't want my children to be non-player characters of me. I want them hooked into the source of all life and beauty. I want their face to turn to the sun so that they shine, and all the little beings down in Whoville look up at the sky at the full moon and say, wow, give me those binoculars. It's beautiful. The pockmarked craters, the gray. Well, pocking, gray, how could that be beautiful? But it is. It's because the light of the sun is shining on it. One must face the fact that all the talk of his love for men and his service being perfect freedom is not, as one would gladly believe, mere propaganda. Because propaganda, of course, is turning everybody into a non-player character so that they can all go to the poll and vote for one or the other. That's the goal, right? Turn them all into little non-player characters. And no, that's not what our Father in heaven, the enemy above, wants for them. He wants them to be free. Well, that's running a terrible risk. Yeah, it is. But what if, in fact, the source of life at the center of the universe is both perfect freedom and perfect everything else, not devolving into all of the kind of chaos we see when human beings have freedoms, or actually when they have all this freedom, don't they then start getting colonized by the demons, and all of the non-agentic, reciprocal narrowing ways that human beings do. He really does want to fill the universe with a lot of loathsome little replicas of himself. Creatures whose life on its miniature scale will be qualitatively like his own, not because he has absorbed them, but because their wills freely conform to his. We want cattle who can finally become food. He wants servants who can finally become sons. We want to suck in. He wants to give out. We are empty and would be filled. He is full and flows over. Our war aim is a world in which our Father below has drawn all beings into himself. The enemy wants a world full of beings united to him, but still distinct, not absorbed, not non-player characters, a world full of real gaming persons. But again, you begin to see, well, wait a minute, I thought we were NPCs. Yeah, we are deep down inside. But we're NPCs who have to sort of take on the way of the creator, to become creative like him, to become sub-creators. The author of all wishes to give characters in his story agencies. He wants them to grow up and become authors too. Like Pinocchio, to become real. To be free, freedom from, and freedom to. Now, to do this, we have to be in alignment with the source of all reality and agency and freedom. Read this chapter 5 of the letter to Diognetus. For the Christians are distinguished from other men, neither by country, nor language, nor customs which they observe. So this is a new thing. Now, in the midst of this imperial mass, a new distinctive element comes forward. And why are they distinctive? They're not just chasing status or chasing their jollies by sex or food or amusements or this or money or fame. They're not just doing that. They're doing something different. And it's not because of their country. They're not just, they're sort of like Agent Smith popping out, but they don't destroy the garbage man that was driving the truck. Suddenly the garbage man becomes more of a garbage man. He becomes the right kinds of garbage man that can, oh, Mrs. Smith, your garbage can isn't out. Can I go bring it to the street and empty it for you? Oh, I don't think you meant to throw this away. Oh, this should be recycled. Actually becomes a real agent who can live productively in the world, who can make even garbage collecting godlike. Nor they neither inhabit cities of their own, nor employ a peculiar speech of their own, nor lead a life which is marked by any singularity. The relevance realization is sort of hard to capture. The course of conduct which they follow has not been devised by any speculation or deliberation by inquisitive men. They're not merely the product of philosophers. Nor do they, like some, proclaim themselves to be the advocates of a merely human doctrine. They say, our connection is with the divine. Well, lots of people say that. See, and Christianity is going to have to endure the cynicism and the and the NPC nature of many of its Christians. But inhabiting Greeks as well as barbarian cities, according as the lot of each of them has determined, and following the customs of natives in respect to clothing, food, and the rest of their ordinary conduct. We see secularity already beginning here. They display to us their wonderful and confessedly striking or peculiar methods of life. They dwell in their own countries, but simply as sojourners. As citizens, they share in all the things with others, and yet endure all things as if foreigners. Every foreign land to them is their native country, and every land of their birth is a land of strangers. They marry, as do all others. They beget children. Now, you look at my conversation with Tim with 2 M's. He's married young, and oh, you must be a Christian. You married young. We don't marry young. We just live with our girlfriends until we get into like our 40s or 50s, and then maybe we'll marry them because we want a little bit more of a foundation if we're going to bring children into the world. But we don't want to do that too soon because children are such a bind on my lifestyle. Yeah, they are. And then they're glorious. They have a common table, but not a common bed. And, well, common table, common bed. I ate with her. I slept with her. Isn't that the way dating goes now? They are in the flesh, but they do not live after the flesh. Well, what does he mean? They're not non-player characters, just consumed by their own appetites. And again, you can see other philosophies doing similar things. You can see these patterns in the philosophers, and that's what sort of then creates, well, the common frame of understanding and dialogue. But something else is going on with them, and it's not just the exception, the monk to it. It's the regular guy who seems to be like everyone else in his nation or tribe, but he's a little different. And it's hard to exactly nail the relevance realization of their uniqueness. They pass their days on earth, but they are citizens of heaven. They obey the prescribed laws and at the same time surpass the laws by their very lives. They love all men and are persecuted by all. They are unknown and condemned. They are put to death and restored to life. They are poor, yet make many rich. They are in lack of all things, and yet abound in all. They are dishonored, and yet in their very dishonor are glorified. They are evil spoken of, and yet are justified. They are reviled, and yet bless. They are insulted, and repay the insult with honor. They do good, yet are punished as evildoers. When punished, they rejoice as if quickened into life. And this is where you see there's some really new translations that needed, because if you read enough older stuff, you can kind of enjoy that strangeness of language, and it becomes holy in that sense because it's unusual, but a lot of it isn't understood well. They are assailed by Jews as foreigners and are persecuted by Greeks, yet those who hate them are unable to assign any reason for their hatred. Well, I just don't like them. Well, why? Because they're resisting your colonization? Because what you really want to do is make them non-player characters? And so you can see, obviously spending a lot of times in this corner, in this political corner of the internet with a lot of libertarians. And what's the idea beneath this libertarian idea? It's that people ought to be free. Well, that comes out of the Enlightenment. Well, the Enlightenment comes out of the Reformation and the Reformations and all of the Renaissance. And that all goes back to classical period. Yes, but you can see where it's these Christians that are living this out on a mass scale. And that's really, you'll find random philosophers and strange people sort of exhibiting some of these things. But what Jesus seems to do is redo the code. And through the church, code seems to be rewritten that on a massive scale, more and more people sort of are able to begin to get into the foothills of this kind of living. And they themselves desire to go further up and further in on a larger and larger scale. And we're image bearers. See, we're not NPCs of him. We're image bearers because we are reflecting, but we're reflecting that creativity. And so it's both reflection and freedom. Again, because it's not just duplication. My children are not just duplicates of me. They reflect me, but they're bringing something new. Tolkien called them sub-creators on fairy stories, if you've ever read that essay of his. We must reflect in order to actually gain the freedom. And this is reciprocal broadening. And so, yes, we are image bearers. We we can't even say we begin as non-player characters because we're always destined to become real game players. The opposite is not reflection, but mere repetition, which is reciprocal narrowing because the copy of the copy of the copy. And so what must come into us is, well, that's why Christians use the language, the Holy Spirit, to receive the Holy Spirit. And why does the Holy Spirit in Pauline terms mean, well, not just an ability to resist the drink or the desire or the passions or the epithumias, not just that in kind of a, we're going to lock them down. And again, churches have betrayed this many times. Certainly not going to get me to tell fairy stories about the church. Well, you will and you won't. But suddenly to have this spring out of new life and to be desirable and to transcend and to become non-player characters, to become a real boy, which reflects not only the pattern, but the source of pattern creating. Can non-theism work? This line of thinking makes me think no. Why? To be original, to be free, to be a real game player, we must reflect this freedom. There's something of the sun that must somehow get into us. Well, how does it get into the moon? Well, there's the pattern. There's a deep irony here. To be sources, we must be united with the source. We are too small, too shallow, too originating. We didn't originate ourselves. We came from our parents. We didn't come up with all these grand ideas of the culture, all of these, it's so funny when I watch people arguing that the humanist Christian morality they inherited, but it feels so natural to them, is just suddenly it started with them and its obviousness. And it's like, well, let's put you in a Japanese internment camp and just see how obvious it is. Again, one of the dramatic lines of that book is, it's a rare thing to meet a saint. And here's the funny things about saints. They're hard to describe because there's that creative source. There's that sun that's reflecting. And with my GIF isn't running here. I want my GIF to run. There we go. Because the sun is, so there's someone in a CRC church that I preach in sometimes that works for the jet. Basically he works in an organization that does nothing but study the sun. And you can go to websites and look at live images of the sun. And when you watch fire burn, there's a reason people, could confuse God with mere fire. And it's because somehow you can see through fire and say, well, I'm seeing through to the creative center of the universe. And when you watch images of the sun, you can just sort of watch it, and it's just always changing. And you could say, yeah, but that's just playing on your NPC brain. Okay, but yeah, you're barking at the door of a meaning crisis with that one. Because now this is just a little film loop, of course, but it's just changing. And so in order for me to have that quality, I need to somehow be united with that quality. And of course, well, what's the language for that? Well, the Holy Spirit, of course. The Holy Spirit comes in me and displaces or dispossesses or at least retards, because they haven't all gone away in me by any means, the little patterns in me. And suddenly I can participate in a far larger pattern, a pattern that goes to the foundations of the universe and ends in the glorious remaking of this universe into one which is better and without decay, and will go on and on and on. That's the Christian story. That's the Christian vision. We are susceptible to demons, and we need a power greater than ourselves. And so non-theism, what's your source? Freedom can be a fudgy word, but it's what we desire, isn't it? It's freedom from the demons. Now, which frame are you talking out of, Paul? Well, talking out of both of them. It's freedom from the demons. Well, what are the demons? Well, you know what your demons are. If I say it that way, you know exactly what I'm saying. And you want to be connected with that source of light and life. You are the sun. I am the moon. Give me that creativity, that power. And when you give it to me, may it not be as Sauron colonizes, but may it be that my creativity and my power are in alignment with yours, so that, well, and this is exactly how we find Jesus talking about himself in the Gospel of John. That I and the Father are one. Why? We do the same things. Well, why do you do the same things? And why, Jesus, are you so fresh? The woman comes to the well. Well, you should have asked me for water. What do you mean? You don't have a bucket. I would have given you springs of living water that well up. Well, that would sure be nice. Indoor plumbing would be an advantage. So I could just stay home because all the women of the village hate me because I'm hotter than them and I colonize their men. And she becomes the apostle to the village. I found the Messiah, a Samaritan. What kind of Messiah are you looking for? Well, in some way, we're all looking for the same Messiah. We're all looking for the genuine article. We're all looking for the source of light and life. We're all looking for the thing that makes us drunk, but never really drunk, that refreshes us, but this freshness does not grow old. We're looking for freedom. What we desire, but not that our desires, we would be cloyed. Our palates would be cloyed from that pleasure. And now that we have fat and sugar and amusements and Netflix and internet and all of these things and all kinds of ways to amuse ourselves to death, suddenly we realize, well, we saw something in there that for a moment was fresh, but it was unstable and we couldn't maintain it. If I could put time in a bottle. The freedom to shine, to reflect the first light, to reflect the first cause. But not to be united with it, but not to lose ourselves. To reflect, embody, repeat, creativity, life-givingness, authenticity. Isn't that what we want? We want to shine. We need to be with the one who shines. We understand non-player characters, but we want to be a real boy.